Everybody, welcome to a, what we'll start with is a special selectmen's meeting to approve 2 consent items. So I'm going to call this to order. It looks like we have got all selectmen present, which means we have a quorum. So first on the agenda is an event permit for January 22nd, 2022 for the Ravex performance. And I need a motion.
So moved.
Steve's
Second.
motion and Ethan seconds. Comments or questions? All those in favor, Ethan,
Aye.
Steve,
Aye.
Shelley,
Aye.
Ethna.
Aye.
I'm in favor as well, so that's unanimous. The second item on the agenda is the Rangeley Lake Snowmobile Club parade permit, again scheduled for January 22nd, which is Snow Day weekend, and I need a motion.
Motion to approve.
Ethan's motion
Second.
and Steve seconds. Any other questions or comments? All right, Shelley, your vote. Mrs. Lowell, your vote.
Aye.
Steve?
Aye.
Steve,
Aye.
Ethan,
Aye.
Ethna,
Aye.
and I vote aye as well. That is unanimous, 5-0. I'll entertain a motion to adjourn the special selectmen's meeting.
So moved. Motion to adjourn.
All right, Steve's motion. Ethan, I'll count that as a second. And all those in favor, Ethna, your vote.
Aye.
Steve,
Aye.
Ethan,
Aye.
Shelley,
Aye.
and I vote in the affirmative as well. So we have adjourned the special selectmen's meeting. Tracy, thank you for pulling that the last details together so they can move on with their event. We are next
You're
going to move
welcome.
right into the public workshop for chapter 38. And in the annotated version, we begin at 3865. The last meeting, we ended with the, I believe, if I remember, my notes are right, we ended with a wildlife protection paragraph and suggested that we reference that this is verbatim per inland fisheries and wildlife. So those are the notations I have there, or as identified in inland fisheries and wildlife laws. So that brings us down to section 38, 9.1, 2-family dwellings, and then multifamily dwellings. Anyone on the board have any comments on this? It's mostly in black type, which means there aren't any changes. All right. Anything from the public? Valerie, go ahead. You need to unmute, Valerie.
Okay, there we go. So just from my own personal thing, nothing to do with the RFA, just that I made a comment previously that housing is not affordable, and having the high square footage in multifamily, single family, old rehabbed in several of these different things all makes it unaffordable for somebody to build, to rent, or for somebody to rehab and rent, because your square footages are too high such that if you wanted to charge rent that will cover your costs, people can't afford to live there and be workers. So I'm not saying what it should be made to, although I think I did submit a whole list of comments, so you had it in writing, so I didn't have to just you'd have it written down and Bailey wouldn't have to take notes. I sent Bailey an email today with all these comments in red, so she would have it. But tie it to the cost square foot or something such that it makes it reasonable for somebody to make affordable housing.
Perhaps, yeah, we haven't seen those comments, Val. So,
Bailey has them.
Feel
They're in her
free.
email.
okay. So feel free to raise whatever you've emailed, you know, as we get to the section, feel free to raise that concern that was relevant to your comments. And so, so this comment obviously has to do with, are you talking more single family dwellings than anything?
All of them, because the square footages are 600 square foot on one floor, which if you're building a house, you're guaranteed to have a very large house if you're making 2 floors, even if you got to have 600 square feet on one floor. So there, you know, you can't build a small square footage house. That would not cost very much, so somebody could buy it. And the idea was that with somebody to call something affordable, it had to be not more than 80% of the average person's working person, the average wage for the community, and then what their income would allow them at a bank for an FHA thing to take. And so it works out to like 100 to 110, depending on, you know, what county and whatever you're talking about for a house. So that's not a whole lot to buy a house. There aren't really any houses available for that price range, 100 to 120,000. They're not there. They're like twice that. So if you're going to build it, it's got to be smaller.
Well, we can,
So I'm
Steve,
just
did you have?
making these comments. I mean, it's just,
Yeah.
I'm not saying what it has to be. I'm just saying it, you should maybe adjust the square footages or not mention the square footages or do something else, because nobody can build in Rangeley and afford the house.
Steve?
Are we still on, pardon me, 385?
Yes.
Multifamily dwellings and 2-family dwellings in those 3 paragraphs there?
Yes, it's all,
Yes.
because each one
Okay.
says 600 square feet.
Thank you, Val. I got that part. I think where this discussion needs to come in, Valerie, referencing your points are the next 2 pages. If I may ask, Madam Chair, are we looking to make sure that each one of these 38.91, 92 are clear and move from that point to the table where Valerie Zapolsky, Dr. Zapolsky's issues are? I agree with her, but it's on page 3867, where we can get into the nuts and bolts of square footage and population density, square footage of areas to be developed.
Yeah, we've got the minimum lot size and, you know, the minimum square footage for an apartment building, you know, or a conversion needs to be 500 square feet. So yeah, let's progress, you know, we'll get there. But let's progress through everything in a step-by-step manner. So, so basically this, I see Val's point, you know, because the 2-family dwellings shall meet the dimensional requirements for a single family dwelling times 2. So, you know, her points are relevant. And, you know, we've all made notes and comments and, you know, certainly a final review, you know, before we send it off to the planning board will be, you know, will happen. And, you know, we'll look forward to reviewing Valerie's notes, but, you know, just make a notation here, you know, regarding, you know, the square footage. So yeah, it's relevant to this page because it refers to the dimensions of a single family dwelling and the fact that they're just, the minimum size is doubled. Anything else on this page? Yes, Bailey, go ahead.
I just want to make note that the dimensional requirements that it's referring to is the size of the lot, not the size of the dwelling space.
Okay,
And that is only in the shoreland zone, not all zones.
thank you, Bailey.
Bailey, be careful on that one because when we get to the next page, I'm going to show you 2 points that you might want to clarify, but I'm all set with this page as it's presented, if that means anything.
Okay, thank you, Steve. All right, are there any other comments before we turn to 3866? Seeing none. Page 3866 is a continuation of the lot size in the various districts, mostly in black, which means no change. There are some, green highlighted numerical updates. Anything on this page from the Board of Selectmen? Steve, go ahead.
Point 3, in the village and commercial districts, lot area shall meet and exceed the following. It says for lots served by public sewer, the minimum lot size of a multifamily development shall be 20,000 square feet for the first structure. If we could go to the next page on the chart that you have, Bailey, on lot area square footage, under shoreland zoning is 40,000 with sewer. Woodland is 20,000 with sewer. Residential is 10,000. Village is 5,000. That doesn't coincide with what point 3 says here in the village and commercial districts, which are both 5,000, not 20,000 square feet. Could you explain that to me, please?
So that's for converting an existing structure into apartments. So if the existing structure exists on a lot of that size, then it can be converted into multiple apartment units. The 20,000 square foot would be for new rental developments.
So if somebody had a building on a lot and wanted to tear it down, then they become more restrictive. If we were to keep that building intact and change it, that person would only have to meet a 5,000 square footage requirement as opposed to a 20,000 square foot if we tore it down, correct?
That sounds correct to me.
My question then is, it seems counterintuitive, or counterproductive, if you will, to mandate an old structure be resurrected, if you will, if your goal is to get housing in the village and the commercial district. If our goal is something else, then maybe we should think about this a little bit more.
Is there some kind of rationale that, or I guess the purpose, I mean, it states in the apartment conversions is to, is to create less expensive rental units. So the purpose is there. So Selectman Philbrook is asking for further consideration, or maybe some symmetry between the creating of apartment buildings, whether rehabbed or new construction.
Bailey, if I might, or excuse me, Madam Chair, if I
Go
might.
ahead.
As people come into town and look for housing, clearly an issue. Dr. Sapolsky brought this up earlier, and I concur. I think finding ways, it's actually stipulated as we go through here, and there are some specific aspects of this chapter 38 that address affordable, attainable, whatever acronym, whatever phrase we use to describe housing and its costs thereof. does it make sense for us to look at these buildings in town that are, built in the turn of the last century, specifically when it comes to the points of putting in sprinkler systems, proper plumbing, ripping apart interior walls to save the exterior bones just to meet a notion of upgrading to apartments? Wouldn't it be better for us to look at population density requirements in the commercial in the village district and try not to be as restrictive as we are? I think that really is what it comes down to. We had a presentation at our last selectmen's meeting that identified that as an issue with developers or folks in town who wish to change their property. It's over. And they can't do it because it doesn't meet requirements, meet lending requirements, and it doesn't even come close to meeting the objective of attainable housing. So my question again is population density in these areas, particularly when you get to the 20,000 square foot that you're referring to in point 3 of 386. Restrictive. Thank you.
Any other comments for the village and commercial districts lot area minimum requirements? And, perhaps, perhaps, Bailey can get back to us at some point as to the, rationale for, for the minimum lot size and just clarify that.
Madam Chair, poll our board and ask them if I'm barking up the wrong tree here, or if this is a waste of everyone's time.
Anybody have any opinion? Ethan, do you have an opinion on this?
Well, as a whole, I'm usually not in favor of more regulation that impedes progress. Everybody's definition of progress is different. I understand that. I guess what I'd like to know is the purpose behind this particular piece of the ordinance. Is it environmental? Is it aesthetics? What was the driving point when it was written, or how it's presented? I think a modern building with better fire protection, better drainage, and everything that goes along with it, versus rehabbing an old one with the same requirements is absolutely better. And I think we have to look hard at this ordinance, knowing that knowing the current issues we're facing, which we're discussing at length at this time. So I'm in favor of taking a hard look at square footage requirements and others.
Shelley, any thoughts?
I think we should look at the square footage with the points that both Ethan and Steve have made, because it's in some areas it may not be the same thing where you have houses side by side. If someone wanted to put in like an in-law apartment or something like that. So I think that we should look at those, but I guess I would like to know because these were set prior to, so they've been in existence for quite a while, right, Bailey?
Yes.
So then just maybe find out exactly, because it could have been like exactly what Ethan says. It might have to do with fire. It might have to do with different parameters, and it might be just a standard that's for the state of Maine. So.
Ethna, anything?
I'm curious if we're reading the language correctly. It's reading the minimum lot size. I think we're confusing the lot size and the minimum size requirement for the structure on the lot.
No.
Thanks, Val. Could you clarify, please, Amanda? Bailey,
I-
sorry. I just pulled an old name. Sorry, Bailey.
So yes, this is referring to lot size. So just for reference, 20,000 square feet is about a quarter of an acre. And that's for every 3 units. So that's, I believe the idea behind having that space is so that each unit theoretically has an outdoor space to enjoy.
Yeah, that's what, just with the reading, I agree with Bailey. I think it's to have green space, parking, aesthetically pleasing, for a 3-unit building on a quarter of an acre. And the latter just gives a little more latitude for apartment conversions. It's like, if so I'm not terribly concerned about 3.1, but it sounds like there are some selectmen that would like a little more clarification. Val, go ahead.
Okay, if I'm reading this right, there's the thing you're talking about says it needs to be 20,000 square feet, but that's for the new stuff, whereas the minimum lot in the chart says for the village 5,000, which is 4 times as much land requirement, which is what makes things more expensive if we're talking about affordable space. And yes, it's nice to have green space, it's nice to have a parking lot, but that all raises the price of your rent. And if you're downtown and you can walk to work, maybe you don't need so many, a car. But the other thing is 20,000 square feet is half an acre. Because 200 by 200 is an acre, that's 40,000. So that's a half an acre. So that's a big lot.
Bailey, you had your hand up? It's just under half an acre. It's 42, 46. Yeah.
Yes, I just wanted to point out that we do have requirements for off-street parking for any new development of apartments, of multifamily dwellings for each unit. So having parking space is important in all districts. There are exceptions to that for existing structures in the downtown commercial zone, just because there are existing apartments there that don't meet the requirements.
All right. All right, any other comments or questions? All right, we'll come back to this one for a final review. And Bailey can further affirm that the 20,000 square feet are necessary to meet the off-street parking requirements and things that are related to that in our code. Anything for lots not served by public sewer? All right, moving down. The woodland and residential districts, of course, are larger. Anything else on this 3866 page? All right. Moving on to 3867, this page has to do with apartment conversions for an existing home. And the general requirement at the bottom, there's at the bottom of the previous page, the planning board shall grant a conditional use permit for the conversion. And here lists the, mostly in black, there are a few new entries regarding the minimum requirements for apartment conversions only. Questions or comments? right, moving on to mobile homes. At the bottom of 3867, we go into page 3868. Regarding mobile homes, it looks like mobile home parks is all new, but were there any comments or questions on the mobile homes section? Steve?
For Bailey. Sizes, shapes, of mobile homes. I'm curious on page 868. Can you hear me, Bailey?
You're choppy for some reason, Steve. Your voice is just choppy. You know, we get most of it, but.
I live in West Ramsey. Sometimes my internet is spotty. Apologies.
Okay.
I guess not, huh?
Yeah, I think just talk a little slower maybe, and your everything will catch up eventually.
Top of the page 3868, where it says in thick wall of reinforced cast in place concrete. Reason why we can't be using preformed styrofoam reinforced concrete forms, which have 6-inch cores. These are light buildings.
So that falls under point 2 right below. It's another permanent foundation system that can be approved that meets code requirements. So that would fall under that category after review.
Okay. What foundation component be reviewed then, or not be as restrictive on the front line and then have to, I'm just curious why we're making. Thank you, Bailey.
Madam Chair,
Yes, Ethan.
I think I got the gist of what he was saying through there. I think he was saying instead of making it a discretionary point, why not put in point 1 that ICFs are also acceptable, or whatever else. I'm curious why mobile homes are traditionally put on slabs in many places, and even in cold places in Maine. So I'm wondering why a slab with skirt boards isn't allowable either.
So both of those are allowable. It's just another permanent foundation that's approved. I'm not sure why it's a note that was there before. I'm not sure why it specifies just for mobile homes, and I think the point there was to say that there needed to be a permanent foundation under a mobile home. They couldn't be sitting on their wheels or on the axles on blocks. So any foundation system, as long as it meets code, which is the point of point 2 right below the 8-inch wall requirement. We have permanent houses built on slabs in Rangeley, so it's definitely allowable for a mobile home to be on that.
Does that answer your question, Steve?
Thank you. Thank you.
How about you, Ethan? Are you okay with you? Any follow-up questions?
No, it just seems redundant, but if it's understandable, and especially when they bring it to the code officer, if she explains it that way, then it can just stay where it is, I guess.
All right. So section 38.9.5 mobile home parks is all new, and this goes into page 3869.
Hey, Cindy,
Yes.
it's Shelley. I just was having a question on mobile homes. And so I understand that what you want, if it's going to be a permanent structure, but a lot of people bring them in and have them for short term. So a lot of them have gravel pads on them. And they can be financed as long as they are tied to the ground. And you can get that with Maine State Housing. So I mean, for us to set the parameter that it has to be concrete, or it can be another type. I mean, we have properties that are out there now that I believe are post and beam. So I just want to throw that out.
So are you saying that that's too restrictive?
Yeah, I think that they should be given the opportunity to do that. I mean, mobile homes aren't that cheap anymore. They're not. Before you pay a little bit extra and get a ranch, but their prices on mobile homes aren't nearly as low as they have been in the past. So I just think that they can be on gravel pads. I mean, I've seen them. Main Street Housing approves that. So I just want to throw that up.
Mhm. Chris, go ahead.
Madam Chair.
Hold on, Chris. Go ahead, Ethan.
I just wanted to, I think Shelley brings up a good point. I hadn't really thought about that. I've worked on a lot of post and pad houses, and we actually live in the land of post and pad houses, especially near the lake. Yeah, and I think that's a good point that Shelley brings up.
Thank you. Chris, did you have some follow-up? Need to unmute.
Okay, sorry. My only thought is I think it's important throughout the code when we do stuff, if we can correlate back to state statute whenever things are in relation to that. So I guess if there's a reference in state statute that deals with what Shelley's talking about with the appropriate system, or add an additional line into that section 0.2, we have something that's impractical due to the building or site, or something to the fact is, if being placed for temporary in nature, temporary defined as X, then it's not required to be a concrete foundation. But post and pads are used around quite a bit. Some people like those Alaskan slabs, which you dig down a few feet, put them, and a lot of people like those techno posts too. So there's a lot of different technology out there. I guess the question is what's going to work in order to satisfy the need there, but also is practical in protecting the consumer or the home individual. So, I mean, a lot of our code exists is more to protect the community and those pieces. So I think that's a place that could use a bit more work.
Mm. Yeah, everyone makes good points, because the first impression is that you've got to pour a concrete, base, and for a lot of folks that's not in their budget. And with Shelley bringing up that Maine State Housing allows for gravel, it might be nice to add more information in detail as to what's allowed by law, especially if we want, if we want this town code to be a little more understandable for someone who wishes to reference it. Any other questions or comments before we move on to mobile home parks? All right, so our goal will be to be a little bit more descriptive in section 3894- or 0.1 and 2. Mobile home parks. So yeah, Bailey, if you could just discuss, what brought this this new into the code, or just the fact that it was absent.
I believe this follows some state guidelines for mobile home parks. I did not add this section. It was done prior to me taking over this project, so I can't speak to exactly where it was pulled from. or if it was more restrictive. I will say that mobile homes and mobile home parks are only allowable in the woodland zoning district, just for awareness of that. I think this is to kind of help us to be able to define mobile home parks specific to the Rangeley culture and that woodland district more than what state requirements for mobile home parks do.
So following up on Chris Farmer's comment earlier, if there is a specific state statute, if this copies it directly or whatnot, it'd be nice to have that reference. So there, folks would know where to find it in state statute. Were there any comments or questions on mobile home parks? All right. Cluster development. Oh, go ahead, Chris.
Traditionally, this has not been looked at in the past as a favorable type thing. Have we looked also at, is there another section, if I missed it in the code, I apologize because I haven't gone back through. Do we have a section for motorhome parks as well? Because they are similar yet different. But I know my folks years ago brought a proposal for one and almost got ran out of town for it. But my thought is that we should, since we are a recreational area, I would think the propensity or the chance that there'd be another person might propose a motorhome park of some sort may come into play, especially since I know Cupsuppet Campground fills up and a bunch of other places do as well, and there is a demand. So my only thought is that maybe as we're working through the mobile home park part, that we also look at motorhomes, because I think over the next 5 or 10 years, the chance that someone may come forward with a proposal, I would think would be more likely than not. I don't know how everybody else feels about that, but there's similar guidelines as far as with septic and lot space and electrical and those type of things. I know that from a zoning standpoint, lots of times they like to limit the areas of which both motorhome and mobile homes are due to the nature of how those can, for lack of a better phrase, deteriorate over time. So all good things to think about. And I think wherever we can use the state statute is better for us, especially since it is such a process for us to change the zone. The more we can reference Title 30A or whatever other title, I think that's a better plan. Thank you.
Thanks, Chris. Yeah, I don't think you missed anything regarding motorhome parks, Chris, at least to my, except where it comes to, you know, how long a structure can sit at a single family residence, and it's, you know, its location in campgrounds is exempt. I mean, go ahead, Bailey.
I believe that a mobile home park would fall under the category of a campground.
A motorhome park would be, yeah. So should that reference be made in here somewhere? I guess when we get to that point, but any other questions or comments? Shelley?
So the other thing is on number 9 on page 3869, it says placement on a pad. And typically mobile homes that are in park, unless they get financing from Main State Housing, they typically still have their wheels on, because if the owner of them isn't always the owner of the mobile home, so they have to find some way to move it. So I'm not sure that really, the placement of the pad and actually typically how the mobile home parks work, if what we have is sufficient. I mean, I know that, probably some don't want them, but we're not sure what the future holds either.
I guess the idea is that if you want a mobile home park in Rangeley, it needs to be placed on a pad with skirting for aesthetic reasons. But yeah, it'd be good to reference state statute as well. Mark?
I think they put skirting on mobile homes so that they can insulate them, because otherwise the underneath is exposed to the winter weather and everything freezes up. So without a skirting, you can't insulate them. I think that's the main reason, but it does help their appearance as well.
Mhm.
And then in the summer, they have to let it air out or they get mold.
All right. Any other questions or comments? Chris?
I see Shelley's point with 0.9, but I don't think we need to spell that out, whether there's wheels or not. I think the skirting is sufficient, as long as if you felt you need to further define the skirting, because one could constitute 6 mil plastic put on with strapping is technically skirting. So you may want to think about if that's part of what you want there.
Yeah, probably a better description of skirting. I don't think it's in the glossary, but certainly something could be added describing acceptable skirting. Duct tape, plywood, or something. All right. Any other comments on mobile home parks? Yeah, go ahead, Mark.
This isn't on mobile home parks, but I just wanted to back up for a brief comment on the lot size for the multifamily dwellings and 20,000 square feet. I realize, we need to help resolve some of these affordability issues, but I also do think it's important to maintain some green spaces, have off-street parking. The town park is too small for people not to have any place in their living area to have a gas grill or sit out, in the summertime and stuff. And plus, I think it adds to the appearance of the village. If everything gets crammed in too tight, the village won't be nearly as attractive and livable as it is right now. So I think that's something to keep in mind. Thank you.
Okay. All right. All right, last call for mobile home parks. All right, go ahead, Chris.
Do we have to have a mobile home park? Are we required by state law to provide that as an option?
Good question. If this is new.
I'm not trying to be snobby. I'm just saying, do we necessarily need to offer that? I mean, in relation to our comp plan and everything else, is it a state requirement that we have mobile home park in Rangeley? We don't currently now, right?
No, and a mobile home can only be located in the woodland zone. I'm looking at I'm at the current land use table to see if there's anything. No.
Just asking, with the scenic byway and everything else, is that something that fits into our brand and our nature of what we're trying to do? So I guess that's a good, to me, that's a reasonable question.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I don't know if, Bailey, go ahead.
I don't believe we're required by state law to have a mobile home park or to allow them in general in the town. I believe the point of having them only allowed in the Woodland District was to avoid any frontage on Main Street to keep that scenic byway.
Thank you, Bailey. Any other comments from selectmen, pro or against adding mobile home parks in our town code as an allowable development? Any thoughts on that, or okay with it? Go ahead, Steve.
Thank you. Remember where woodland is, referencing scenic byways. That could help you in determining whether or not mobile home parks is something that will be seen on the scenic byways. Our town extends from one side of Rangeley into the far side of Aquasic. Scenic byway goes all the way through, and there's some woodland districts there. So be thinking about that. Thank you.
Mhm. Ethan, you had your hand up?
I did, but I don't.
Okay. All right, some food for thought. I think when we, when we come back through, to make some final revisions, I guess my thought is mobile home parks, it kind of does add some complexity to the whole picture, as to, aesthetically, whether the woodland zone is restrictive enough. So it's a good point, Chris, that you brought up. All right, last call, moving on to cluster development. So this is
I
at
got
the,
One more thought,
Chris?
if I could, Cindy.
Yeah.
I just want us to take a serious look at this for sure, because I think, hell, we spent an hour on dark skies because we felt that was important to discuss for the attractiveness and tourism piece and all of that. With the median price of homes tripling in the past 18 months, I think we could be in a situation where someone may come in and take advantage of that piece and find a parcel in Woodland and go ahead and start that. It might not be exactly what we want. So I think it's really important this gets dialed in, because I've seen good parks and I've seen not so good parks. So it all depends on who's doing the work and the development. And I think there should be some kind of a level of measurement on that, of some of the strict scrutiny we do with other commercial developments to that level. So I think that's important.
Mm-hmm. Thank you, Chris. Go ahead, Bailey.
Just related to that, I want to point out that any mobile home park would need subdivision review from the planning board. So they would be able to impose any restrictions at that point.
All right. Cluster developments. The bottom of 3869. It's mostly same language, except in number 2, all developments in the woodland zone shall have a density of no greater than 1 unit per 10 acres. So 1 cluster development per 10 acres. And the cluster development piece continues on for 2 more pages. So is there any questions or comments regarding the cluster development language at the bottom of 3869? Go ahead, Steve.
Thank you. Bailey, does something over, referring back to what we talked about earlier, based on lot size and square footage for multiple unit dwellings. Does that fall under cluster if it's over 3 in a specific area, or are we just talking 10-acre parcels?
We're just talking 10-acre parcels that have like single unit buildings.
Thank you.
And that's 10-acre parcels in the woodland zone.
The good doctor.
That's- Mark, you had your hand, I'm sorry, Mark and then Val.
Yes, so woodland zones, is that the only zone where cluster development's allowed?
Yes. I believe so.
The way this is written, that's what it means.
How many units in the cluster development?
Go ahead, Val.
I'm just, what you said, number 2 says is not what number 2 says. But what number 2 says is that the developments in the woodland zone can have a density of no greater than 1 unit per 10 acres, which implies 1 unit, not 1 development. So maybe the better way to say that, if you're saying the development has a minimal development size of 10 acres for a cluster, which is fine, because you can put lots of units on it, but you can't have 1 unit for 10 acres. That's crazy. That's not a cluster.
No, I meant
Yeah.
1 cluster unit development is allowed in a 10-acre parcel.
Yeah, but
One
I think-
approved 10.
yes, I think that's right. That's correct, but it doesn't say that. So I just think you have to add a word, say 1 cluster unit or something. So it's,
Yeah, something
it
a
says
little
1
more
unit.
descriptive. Yeah, something a little more descriptive for point 2. I think that's a good point. Chris?
So I don't really feel like this, in my experience with cluster development and clustering in general, that this even fits to the normal logic and reason around how this is done. Cluster development, in my understanding, is it's designed to give a developer the ability to do a higher density in one place in order to allow a larger recreational area in another. Meaning if somebody owned, say, 10 acres and 2 acres is prime development space where they can do 8 or 10 units, but then the other 6 or 8 acres have a pond or something else that would, DEP wants protected, or just nice area where people can go out and walk and enjoy. That's how that's done. I mean, if you look around in the larger cities that deal with cluster development, it's a development tool to entice developers to work on their economy of scale and density in order to maximize the good spaces to build in and then provide good buffers in the other spaces. This is done mostly in larger urban areas. I'm very confused about the woodland zone as being like the only zone to do it, because it's actually the opposite of why you do cluster development. Woodland zones are more less dense in rural area anyways. And it would, if you were to go and build a 10 unit development, then you would need, the way this reads right now, you'd need 100 acres to do that parcel. So, I mean, right now with the way things are going in the pieces, I mean, you're looking 500,000-600,000 for land costs before you even get off the ground. It's definitely not going to get to a point where it's affordable or attainable housing at that piece. So to me, this needs to kind of be looked at as what it is as a development tool, and kind of go back and maybe talk with AvCog and some of the other organizations that have helped do these and tweak this, because I don't think it's doing what the development tool is designed for the way it reads right now. And I know that part of this was started with Tom, and now Bailey has it, and planning board's gone through it in those pieces, but in reality, I don't think this accomplished at all what a cluster development is designed to do. Usually there's what's called a kingdom lot or something like that, where you might have 80 acres, you develop 25 units within a 10-acre parcel, and then you leave the other 70 acres for mountain bike trails and walking and nature trails and those type of things. That's pretty much what's done. You'll see that throughout the state. Topsom, some of the other areas that are outskirts of Portland, they've gotten quite good at doing these type of things and encouraging the development that way. It also helps the municipality because when you're maintaining municipal roads or those type of things to do, it keeps the housing kind of tight amongst each other. It also makes it easier for, if you have a developer required to put hydrants or public water or public sewer, those costs drop dramatically if there's a higher density in the areas in which the units are being built. So that's, to me, that's my understanding of cluster, and I don't really think this accomplishes it at all. Thank you.
Mhm. Mark?
Yes, that number 2, I find it quite confusing. And, you know, I think it could be more specific, saying which zones it's allowed in. And if it's exclusive to woodland, it should say that, rather than, you know, just developments in the woodland zone. It doesn't really, it's not clear that if the intent is for that to be the only place, which I disagree that that would be a good idea. But anyway, I just think, you know, it would be helpful if that number 2 was clearer.
Mhm.
Thank you.
We currently have 2 cluster developments in Rangeley. Russell Cove Cluster Subdivision and the Marble Station subdivision is a cluster subdivision as well. And both of those capitalized on a common area, common waterfront because, you know, for these homes or these home sites that are near the water but not on the water. And so I thought, you know, Chris's point is valid. You know, it allowed for, and both are on town water, town sewer. But both allowed for you know, for folks to enjoy a common area, common elements without the tax burden of a waterfront home. So yeah, I think I agree. I've found the cluster development a little confusing. And I got the impression reading it that that cluster subdivision development was allowed in other zones than woodland zone. It just, I mean, typically in the woodland zone, you've got plenty of acreage for a traditional subdivision. But anyway, go ahead, Bailey.
I might have misspoke about the only being allowed in woodland zone with that note. It's not in the land use table as its own use, so that kind of means that it's not really restricted in any zone. It could happen anywhere as long as it meets the size requirements.
Okay. So I think the consensus seems to be that the new number 2 added under cluster development could be a little more descriptive. So it's isn't open for misinterpretation. All right, so that is any other comments on 3869? Next page, 3870. This continues with the cluster subdivision parameters. No new language on this page. No questions or comments. Moving on to 3871. Nothing new here either. Yes, Chris.
I wanted to make a note because I was at one of these DEP things a few years back. I think it's important with any of these that we put together, especially with stormwater runoff, if it's not going into it's not part of the sewer system, that there's a very clearly spelled out maintenance plan on that. Throughout the state, 85% of the LLCs had set up and did these kind of cluster developments. Eventually the LLC or developer is gone to the wind. There's no way to notify anybody, and there's no clear plan as to the maintenance of culverts and those type of things, which then leads to further damage, especially if a road is accepted as part of the town. So I think that's an important thing to make sure that, I don't know where that would go in the footnotes somewhere, but something that there's a clear plan for stormwater runoff and those type of things. The ones that require maintenance, plunge pools, any of those other type of things to mitigate phosphorus export, as we've all had to deal with that, anyone who's done any development in this part of the state, that there's some kind of a clear plan on that so it doesn't become an undue burden for the town. That's it.
That's a good point, Chris. Go ahead, Bailey.
I don't know if it would be considered repetitive to put that information here, as that is part of a subdivision review. And if a cluster development is being reviewed as a subdivision, that would be something covered by the planning board.
Thank you, Bailey.
I'm not concerned where it is. It's just most planning boards throughout the state miss it. So maybe we can add it to our planning board guidelines.
Any other follow-up comments or questions regarding cluster subdivisions on page 3871? All right, moving on to common land maintenance. At the bottom, there's finishing up there. Then we move into, all right, sorry, cluster subdivision, cluster development ends at the top of page 3872. I don't understand why this sentence was added, where open space lands are to be offered to the town. How this falls into the cluster subdivision or cluster development component. So I'm specifically talking about that last sentence, where open space lands are to be offered to the town. The open space requirement shall not be considered fulfilled until town meeting has voted to accept the deed. I mean, typically in a cluster development, there's a homeowners association. They're all responsible for maintenance and upkeep of the common areas and or common spaces. And I'm not sure why the town would come into play with that. I just found that confusing. I don't know if anyone else did. All right, guess it was just me. Moving on to, go ahead, Steve.
I'm in agreement with you. My assumption in this line was that in referencing what Chris said a few moments ago, if the town is going to take over a portion of it, and it will be, as it says in the previous paragraph, or part of this paragraph, selectmen shall ensure that all provisions for the common or public land and facilities within the cluster development are met. If it's our responsibility, then it has to be accepted by the town. Otherwise, it's not our responsibility in a cluster development where there's an association. That's their responsibility.
Right.
Am I
Right.
Ed Bailey or Chris or whoever the legal are?
Well, one would think that if it becomes town property, it's open to the public. It's open to all taxpayers. And often folks buy into a cluster development because of some key shared elements. So I don't know why that would become or even thought to be offered for vote for town property. Chris?
I can speak to that a bit. In Portland, there's several developments that have happened, especially out on Washington Ave and some of the other areas where the cluster development happened, and then the open space was donated, but was given to Portland Trails nonprofit. They now have an interior network that runs, it's called the Forest City Trail. You can walk 11 miles and walk through the entire city through the woods, other than a few intersections. It's quite a project that they've built there, but that's more on the urban planning side. The reason I think it makes sense that the town has to vote on it, because there could be some environmental liability on those pieces. I mean, you know, just like we went through with the parking lot there at Depot Street, you know, we have to determine whether there's exposure there or additional liabilities if things aren't VRAP to that. We do have some sites throughout the area, but I think Steve's point on that goes back to exactly what we were talking about, is that if we end up assuming this, we've got to make sure that everything is obviously in place, and what's that going to be per cost. And as you said, Cindy, if the town takes it over, then it's public use to everybody.
Yeah, so
And
that
I
was my
often see that doesn't happen. Just like Marble Station, they'd never donate that, because then everybody has public access to the water, right? I mean, it doesn't make sense.
Right. That was my confusion, is the fact that this is under cluster development. I don't see how it fits.
Well, I think the line is just to quantify there that if land is offered, it's not considered open space until the town has voted to accept it. But I guess the question is, if the town doesn't accept it, then it's not open space and the development somehow fails. I think it puts us into a corner a little bit. So maybe that's where you were getting at with that line, because if we strike it, then it doesn't open us up really to anything else. I mean, the town either accepts it or they don't, but does that mean if the town doesn't accept it, that open space stays owned by the development? Does that mean the development is not in compliance? I guess, I think it almost creates a question.
Well, Joe, did you have something to add?
Just real quickly, Madam Chair, there certainly can be open space on private property. The town is not required to take ownership of any open space in a development. And one thing I would add to this, which kind of concerns me, is if the town does take it, there'll be no taxes paid on that too. So that's something else to think about. You know, it could be a loss of revenue. But we can follow up on this. Bailey and I will follow up on this and find out where the language came from. I've never seen this before anywhere else, so it's worth looking into to find out the genesis of it and what we might do with it.
Right.
It's my 2 cents.
Thank you, Joe. That sounds like a great plan. Steve?
Years ago, we took over a certain road because it was requested by that particular area, which initially was a development. I don't believe it fell under cluster, but it was a development area. The requirements were that we made them bring the road up to specs before we would take it over. And I think if in your research, Joe, you might find that this is really revolving around a road, culverts, things of that nature in a particular development. Open space, as Chris brought up and Cindy brought up, are certainly a concern, but I believe this has to do more with roads. Thank you.
Thank you, Steve. Any other final comments on cluster development? All right, moving on to hotels, motels, and inns. And the requirements listed on page 3872. Going on to page 3873.
Question?
Yeah,
Somewhere in here, I've got to bring this up because it's been asked of me by a few citizens. And I don't know if this is the right place. So if it's the incorrect place, keep it in mind as a bookmark for where it does fall in. Where does Airbnbs fall into? Hotel, motel, inns? And do they, when a house is put up for an Airbnb, are restrictions imposed similar or same as hotel, motels, and inns? Thank you.
yes, Bailey.
Unfortunately, there are no restrictions on short-term rentals at this point. So that includes Airbnb and any other website that exists. There's hundreds and hundreds of websites that exist for short-term rentals. The only thing we can look at is after a complaint, if they might be overloading a septic system or creating a health hazard by the amount of people that they're having in a house. Other than that, there's no restrictions.
Chris?
In fact, I think there's even a section in the code that says any residential individual may rent out their house at any time. So we actually have it that pretty much everyone can be an Airbnb. Now, some municipalities have gone ahead and put some ordinances and limited the amount of units within a town that can do that because they started running into some affordable housing issues. Sounds familiar. So I guess that's a question if we want to go down that road. I think it'll be a pretty tough road to go down. But I think it wouldn't hurt for us to look at least having people register so we at least know what's going on, especially from a public safety and some of these other things. I've lived next door to an Airbnb and below me on Main Street there. And sometimes it's quiet and sometimes you think there's a fraternity house party going on. So I think density is a good point. And some of those things, it depends on how much we want to actively get in that and how much burden we want to put on our code enforcement team, because that's a lot of work. And maybe we can, it all depends on what we want to do with that, whether we want to encourage and say, if you're using a local rental agency to manage that for you, then maybe there's certain other restrictions. I don't know. It just putting out there, it's definitely should be open for discussion, because there are people actively coming to our town right now buying places just to turn them into Airbnb. It's a big trend nationwide. And some of our larger taxpayers in town are motels, hotels, resorts, and sporting camps. So I think that's something we should keep in mind as well as we're trying to find that balance and look to our comp plan and where we want to go with that. But I think it's worth a discussion to try to figure some of this out, because I think Airbnb has crippled some communities throughout the country, and just to the nature of how they're handled. So I think we should be having an active discussion on that.
Go ahead, Bailey.
I want to make it known that planning board did discuss this option at one point briefly. In that discussion, it felt that it was fair that this, being such a large topic, would require possibly its own chapter in our town code, being such a major part of the town right now. And what Chris said to it becoming part of the comp plan is really important. And I think that's something that will come up as we go forward working on that.
Separate ordinance, I agree, is the way to go if we're going to do anything.
Yeah, I've definitely fielded a number of questions at the law office about Airbnbs and what's being, how properties are being used now, you know, which used to be primary residences or, you know, designated family vacation homes, and now becoming Airbnbs. I think subdivisions are allowed to modify their declarations or bylaws as long as they don't conflict with the deed, and what the deed allows them to do. But yeah, certainly worth a discussion. It's a hot one. Any other comments on? Yeah, go ahead, Shelley.
So Bailey, question, would the, under the hotels, motels and inns, would that include bed and breakfasts and boarding houses?
No, it wouldn't.
Any other questions? All right, we snowball on into campgrounds. So that heading is at the bottom of page 3872, and the body of the description goes into the top of 3873. No changes for campgrounds. Any questions? Recreational vehicles are next. Largely the language is unchanged. This does continue to the top of page 3874. Questions, comments on recreational vehicles? Yes, Steve.
9.9, first paragraph, a recreational vehicle may be placed on a lot and used for habitation for a period not to exceed 14 days, provided that the owner of the recreational vehicle is a non-paying guest of the owner or renter of the residential dwelling located on the lot. Can we clean that up? To me, that's a tiny bit confusing, and if it isn't to everybody else, then maybe we can explain to other folks who've spoken to me about certain trailers that are being used for a lot more than 14 days. Bailey?
At this point, those people are in violation, and honestly, I don't drive around town looking to see if people are living in campers on someone's property. I wish I had time to do that. If I have gotten a note from someone or a complaint about something like that, I would address it at that point. But as it stands, it's a violation.
Does anybody else feel that this cleaned up a little bit, be a little bit more understandable?
Steve, are you suggesting that that this includes some stronger language, that you are in violation of any period of time beyond 14 days is not allowed in violation of this code? I mean, it is.
Well, it seems to me that this paragraph gives somebody an out saying, well, I wasn't in there for more than 6 days, and somebody else the 5 days, and then somebody else came in for another 4 days, and the place is constantly being used. Unless I'm understanding it incorrectly here, please just clear it up for me.
I think I understand what you're saying. It's 14 continuous days, no matter if it's the same guest or not in the recreational vehicle. At that point, if they want to continue using it as a habitation on the property, it has to be removed from the property and they have to get a new permit.
It indicates to me in this paragraph that if you're if you're a paying guest, then there's a loophole. That incorrect or correct? If you're using it as a rental property. Because it says non-paying versus, I would assume, versus paying. It just seems to me that this could be a little bit clearer. You know, you're only allowed to stay in a trailer on a piece of property in the districts that are designed for recreational vehicles for 14 days. After that, you're in violation, paying or non-paying, one way or the other. That's my point. Thank you.
Mhm. Go ahead, Val.
On a similar line, further along on a different page, it's on 3890. It says the recreational vehicle, tent, or similar structure shall not occupy a site for more than 45 days. So that's like even worse. So that's later, but it should be consistent across different things. It should be 2 weeks. Yeah.
Yeah, that one's for campsites. Approved campsites.
No, it
This
says
is
private
just
campsite, and a
private,
private
yeah.
campsite is anybody's lot.
So anything anything else? Go ahead, Chris.
Well, I think this whole section needs work from the top down, because I mean, the recreational village should not be temporarily or permanently connected to any subservice unless the connection is approved by the local plumbing inspector. So if I want to keep my RV there all the time, I go and I have Paul, our plumbing inspector, come in and approve my permanent connection and have that connected right there at on my septic system or whatever. And then I can leave it there permanently connected. That implies that. So there's a lot of this section that I think needs work. I 100% agree with Steve. I could drive a truck through that whole section and have somebody rent for the whole summer without the way it reads. I think they could absolutely do that because it's very ambiguous. So I think this needs to be figured out. And I think we do have people in our community that use an RV in the winter and then they spend their summer here, but they live in their house, but they store the RV. So I guess the question is, can they still store it on their property or not? Is that a violation? How does all that work? So I guess that might want to get clarified as well. And maybe they need a special permit in order to store it on their own property or whatnot. So I guess neither the campground or that really doesn't cover also the motor vehicle park, which is we talked about. So I mean, the campground section doesn't really cover it as clearly as we might want, but I don't know. Anyways, I think this is something that can easily be abused even with the revised language. Thank you.
Mhm. Yeah, all good points. There are definitely some loopholes in here, or places where it could lead it very open to interpretation. Any other questions or comments? All right, 3874 at the top is where the recreational vehicle piece ends. Moving into mineral extraction, section 38.910. So we've got the first two paragraphs that are new. Any comments or questions? .3874, moving into 3875, which is the end of the mineral extraction section. I don't have any particular notes myself on this one. Comments going once. Going twice. And okay, moving into the next few pages are, have all been moved or relocated. So we will have covered them already, or we'll be covering them if they're later in this chapter. So the remainder of page 3875, going into 3876, 77, 78, 79, through the first half of 3886 is all redacted or moved. So if you don't have any objection, we'll start at 3886 with back lots. So back lots on the bottom of page 3886 is unchanged, with evidence of the black type. And it continues into page 3887, ending at the top. Questions, comments on back lots? Yes, Chris.
Is there a reason why we want to restrict the right-of-way easement to serve only one single-family dwelling on a back lot? There's some big back lot parcels throughout this town that could be developed into more than one thing. I mean, I think it would be up to the person who is the one giving the easement if they're okay with more than one single unit. So I guess my concern would be is for us to limit that, if that gives us some opportunity for some more of these back lots to be developed into additional residential units if within the town parameters.
I think you're looking at the difference between a driveway and a road. Go ahead.
Well, it says easement, so that's why I'm asking.
Yeah, go ahead, Bailey.
You said what I was going to say.
Yeah, yeah, that's the one access driveway versus a versus a road to service multiple lots and a potential subdivision. Steve?
After clarifying that, it seems to me that you would want to see your minimum road requirements changed to a town standard road. Because we have seen in the past where you get a subdivision, backlot or otherwise, after a period of time, they want the town to start plowing it. So we should be thinking possibly about maybe changing the vocabulary that discusses the right of way with only a 20-foot width.
It'd be for a driveway. This would be for a driveway, not a road.
Yeah,
That's
but
why
things
So
morph over time. That's what Steve's point.
Yeah,
Yeah.
well, and
Sometimes
that's,
these grow.
well, and that's where a subdivision permit comes in.
But you don't need a subdivision permit as long as you only subdivide 3 lots into 3 parcels every 5 years. So the point is that over time that will develop. So I think it's forward thinking about the 20-foot width, that if they ever want to come back, it's going to be a lot more difficult, especially if the front lot was sold to somebody else, to go back and get a wider right of way if they didn't go forward in the first place and leave it. I hope I'm not misquoting you, Steve, but is that kind of what you're thinking?
Yes, it is. Thank you.
Yeah, go ahead, Mark.
The
thought
town
I
can
just saw
only
us-
take over the maintenance of a road that's built to town spec, and it has to go to town order approval. And
Needs to be paid.
So if they think we need to put the provision in there to do somebody's forward thinking for them. But at the same time, if it's a 5-acre lot with a single dwelling, 20 feet would suffice. But I don't know just how to resolve other long-term thinking, but it would have to be built to town spec if the town's ever going to take it over.
Other questions or comments? All right. So for the sake of the occupation of, of a single family dwelling, the 20 feet in width is standard driveway. And the specs for a road, yeah, if the owner has plans for future development, then I agree. I don't think we should be responsible for their forward thinking. Questions, comments before we move on to home occupations at the top of 3887. All right, home occupations. Got a number of strikes in this first page. Comments or questions on page 3887? Shelley?
So I'm curious to why we removed 3 and 4.
Which one?
Under
3 and
home
4.
occupations, 3 and 4, we removed those.
Oh, thank you.
I think it's a duplicate. At the bottom of page 3888 and 0.7 at the top of 3889, I think pretty much say the same thing. Valerie, you're muted.
Number 2, actually it's number 1, sorry. It says, do not employ any persons who do not make the resident their permanent home. What is that about? It's like, you can't employ people to clean your house and plow. I mean, I don't understand that whole comment.
Yeah. Go ahead, Bailey.
So that first section that you're referring to is home occupations that don't require any extra permitting. So if you're working by yourself, say you work from home, say you have your own business making crafts or something like that, and you just work by yourself at your home, that means that you're not required to get any type of permitting. Once you do employ people who live outside of the home, you do need permitting.
Okay, I guess it's just that it's a double negative. So maybe it should say, things that require more than certain number of people require permitting. I mean, it's just a double negative. You don't require it if you don't imply. I mean, it's confusing to me.
Thank you, Val. Any other questions or comments before we move on to the next page?
Madam Chair,
Yes, Steve.
I think Bailey had her hand out to maybe explain Shelley's concerns about 3 and 4 being eliminated. I'd like to hear what she has to say about those.
Yep. Bailey.
I just want to make the point that all of this red strike through in the home occupation section is repeat language that happens later in the section. It was repeated for the different types of home occupations with the same language in multiple places. That has kind of been, it's already covered by, if you look right under home occupations, .1, it says, and the general requirements of this section, which covers all of those other specifications. So they only need to be written once. So all that strike through is written still in this section.
Thank you.
Any other questions for page 3887? All right, going on to page 3888. Going on to page 3889. Finishes up home occupations before we get into individual private campsites.
I have a concern, .10 on 3889.
Go ahead, Steve.
Okay, maybe I'm splitting hairs here, but if your home occupation is fixing lawnmowers, little tractors, this, that, and the other thing, there should, and it says there shall be no public display of goods or wares or machinery used in a home occupation visible from any public or private way or adjacent properties. Am I not understanding a home occupation clearly? Because if there's going to be, say for instance, somebody's retired and is going to be fixing somebody's lawnmowers, and do we consider him a home occupation, or do we consider him a mechanic and he needs a conditional use permit? Could be a she. I don't mean to be sexist about it. Any comments, Bailey?
I agree. My concern with that point also is people who sell vegetables in a vegetable stand on the side of their house or something like that. I think the point of this is to not, so people aren't creating a storefront in their house, but it could be specified better.
So could we look at some better vocabulary that helps define what the intent is? If it meets the home occupation with no employees, you live on the property, you produce crafts, and you want to hang your little dream catcher in the window to illustrate this is what you do, it's illegal. It's not accepted in this, the way the language is written. So I'm circling this, Cindy, so we come back to this with some better ideas.
No, it's an excellent point, because we see people selling, their garden, fresh fruits and vegetables, in a table in their front lawn, or someone with a small engine lawnmower repair service as well. But yeah, I see the intent not to create an unlicensed storefront. So yeah, it would make sense to make that clear.
Thank you.
Anything else from the board? All right, Chris Farmer.
I was thinking along that lines with 10, if we could cover most of that if we made it that there's not a permanent display of goods, because lots of times you putting food out there, it's there. I'll be frank, I was thinking about doing that with my honey, having a little thing out by the road with the honor system. People could grab what they want, but it's not going to be out there 12 months of the year. It's portable. And I guess that would also help us deal with the person doing the lawnmowers and tractor type of things. Those aren't permanently affixed. They're movable. those type of things. So maybe that's something to think about with the language, is that, you know, a permanent, I think the intent here is to prevent a permanent storefront from being installed or built that's a long-term thing versus a, you know, lemonade stand or whatever you want to call it type of setup. So I maybe that can be thought about with the language.
Mhm. Yeah, all good points. Any other questions or comments before we move on to individual private campsites? All right, at the bottom of page 3889, there's just a clause that is new language. Everything else is in black. Anything there? Any points, questions before we move into 3890? Yes, Mark.
I would just like to I'm not trying to jump into the land use tables, but under individual private campsites, under residential, it says no. And I actually think they could be quite appropriate in some residential settings. And I don't know if it's a setback issue or a buffering issue or just what it would be, but I think when we get to the land use table part there, we should look at the individual campsite portion of it. Thank you.
Okay. All right. Anything else under individual private campsites? It finishes at the top, and then we move into signs. So anything at the top of 3890? Go ahead, Val.
So my comment previously about the 2-week limit, this says 45-day limit. Is there a reason that we need to have 45 days instead of just 2 weeks, for the same reason of the whole Airbnb, where people just stick it there and then they're renting it all summer long? Or we just opening up a door we didn't have before?
Mark?
I can't put my fingers on it right this minute, but I think under the definition of individual campsites, it also includes tents. And, you know, that's different from a RV or a camper or that type of thing. And that's why I tend to think, you know, they could be quite appropriate there in a residential setting. Okay, thank you.
Madam Chair,
Yes, sorry.
could we have Bailey weigh in on this, please, and get some clarification?
Yep, just waiting for her hand.
Related to the 45 days?
Sure, yep.
That's existing language. I'm not sure where it originates from.
Yeah, I mean, I'm sorry.
Existing language doesn't mean it stay. My feeling, and to echo some of Val's points earlier, is we need to come up with some rationale as to why 45 days is the right number. So, you know, corroborate what Mark says. There is some potential benefits to this. And do we look at a more a length of time that makes more sense due to the changes in housing circumstances, or what is it we're trying to accomplish here, as opposed to just staying with the same language? Because I believe we are asking, I think this should be changed. Thank you.
I mean, there is a definition of individual private campsite in the glossary in the back, which delineates it from a single family residence where someone is pulled an RV into the driveway and is parking it there for occupancy. There's, it describes some general improvements made for a private individual campsite. But why there's a difference in, why the residential can't stay there 45 days, I don't know. So maybe that's something we can, Bailey can come back with some more information in the future. Anything else before we move into signs? All right, signs, all new. It's all green. And we'll take this one section at a time. So we first come up with this, we've got on page 3890, signs, the purpose and permitting. Any comments or questions on the content of 3890? All right. Going into page 3891. Yes, Val, go ahead.
3891, on the top half, point 6, it says flags, decorative banners and such are not no greater than 15 square feet in area that are used for personal but not business use are exempted. So that means every business has to get a permit for their open sign and the banner that otherwise you could have up for 2 weeks. So I just feel like there should be, businesses should also have one banner, one that you don't have to go and get a permit for because everyone's got one. And you just waste a lot of CEO time. So you don't have for all the different open signs.
Yeah, I can't think of a business on Main Street that doesn't stick out an open flag of some design or color scheme. Thoughts on that from the board?
I'm not sure if I'm reading it wrong or not, but it says that are used for personal, not business use.
Right. They said that the personals are exempted, but businesses aren't, which implies you have to go get a permit. And so what I'm saying is everybody should have one, business or personal, one flag, one banner. And that personal is not limited. Didn't say how many. So it just seems like there should be numbers specified and doesn't matter if you're business or personal.
Yeah, because this section does pertain to the exemptions for permits. So it does not allow, it states that a business would need to be permitted to have a flag. Go ahead, Bailey.
I would consider a flag being a temporary sign, an open flag being a temporary sign. So a business going and putting their open flag out during their operating hours is temporary.
Where is that addressed? Further on?
No, it's back under number 1.
Oh, okay. And that just temporary, doesn't matter if you're business or personal, just temporary. So
Right.
what's the definition of temporary? Less than 2 weeks? What's the what's the definition of temporary?
I guess we'd have to take a look at the statute that's identified there to see if that's temporary signs. I don't think of flags as being temporary signs. That's just in my mind's eye. I think of, just other means of signage, not a flag. And if you think we need to include temporary signs or flags placed in accordance with this statute, the statute may identify temporary, but I didn't look it up. Any other questions or comments for this section? All right. That takes us into, so are there any, and does this board have any objections to qualifying or allowing a temporary flag or on a business, where this restricts it for personal use? Any concerns about that? Both the open flags that are out, et cetera. Steve?
I agree with the comments earlier that it's got to be defined a little bit better. If in the exemption, we have to delineate business versus personal, then what is permissible is probably more of what it should say. Personal use, you can use it up to 15 square feet for 2 weeks. A business use a temporary sign daily, goes up at open of business hours and closes, it comes down at the end of business hours. I just question all of this a little bit. We asking Bailey to go around town and say, Ball Mountain Camps, you didn't take your sign down at 11:30 when you closed up, it's there the next morning. I mean, really, what are we getting into here? So there are some of those, and I know that she's going to say she doesn't have time for it. I agree with her. However, it's kind of what it's coming down to. Thank you.
Yeah, go ahead, Bailey.
I was just gonna say I'd be at fault for not taking the flag down at the shed every once in a while too, so.
Go ahead, Val.
I just think since it specifically says flags in number 6, that you can't say flags are in number 1. Since you said it, you gotta be clear about it. So yeah, number 6 needs to be fixed. Yeah.
All right, so number 1 has to do with probably the definition of, or the guidelines for what a temporary sign is, and number 6 needs some more description and embellishment. Any other thoughts on that from the board? Bailey, go ahead, then Joe.
I just want to point out the definition of temporary sign does include flags and message flags, and it specifies less than 90 days within any 12-month period, and I believe during operating hours would probably fall under 90 days within a 12-month period.
Thank you, Bailey. Joe?
Madam Chair, I was going to read, if you'd like, Title 23, 1913A1L, which is referenced in 4.1. It's a couple sentences long, if you'd like me to read it.
Yeah, that's fine. Go ahead.
So temporary signs placed within the public right-of-way for a maximum of 12 weeks per calendar year, except that a temporary sign may not be placed within the public right-of-way for more than 6 weeks from January 1st to June 30th, or for more than 6 weeks from July 1st to December 31st. A temporary sign may not be placed within 30 feet of another temporary sign bearing the same or substantially the same message. Temporary sign may not exceed 4 feet by 8 feet in size. A sign under this paragraph must also include or be marked with the name and address of the individual, entity, or organization that placed the sign within the public right-of-way and the date the sign was erected within the public right-of-way. This sounds very much to me like political signs, campaign signs.
Mm-hmm.
But that's the reference that's made here verbatim. 1913A. It's called categorical signs. And then 1L is the section I just read to.
Okay. Thank you, Joe.
Sure.
So we're entering the last 5 minutes of this meeting. Looks like we'll need to schedule another. Any other questions or comments before we get into general sign standards? All right. Seeing none. General sign standards is the second half of page 3891. Questions or comments?
Madam Chair,
Steve, go ahead.
I think that section 38, 10.2 all the way down is going to require more than 5 minutes. I have 5 minutes worth of questions on just one section here.
Okay.
Time to hang it up for tonight.
All right. So at our next selectmen's meeting, or if the board has time now, or if you have your calendars handy, we can schedule another public workshop. Our next selectmen's meeting is the 24th of this month because we've got a holiday a week from today.
Guys, be quiet for a minute. Oh, I'm sorry. I didn't realize I was off mute. I apologize.
Yeah, no. So did the selectmen want to schedule another workshop now or wait till our selectmen's meeting to pull the calendars and schedule it? Wait till the 24th? Okay, all right, I'm seeing a consensus nodding yes. All right, well then we'll conclude the public workshop and we will pick up on page 3891 at our next scheduled public workshop. So have a good night, everybody, and thank you all for your contribution and participation. Have a good night.
Thank you. Good night.
Good night.
Thank you, Cindy.